This is Spiritual Soul Sliding Sideways, Chapter 14, The Circle of Chaos. This insane darkness stuck in between. This is my struggle. Can it be seen? I never knew my spirit could go mad. I never knew I could feel unrested and uncomfortable. I never knew I could be so misplaced and confused. I never knew I could be so far away from light. I thought I was strong and important. I thought I would always have order and less chaos. The day I lost my mind was the lesson in true spiritual insanity. Spiritual suppression was the beginning. Spiritual insanity was the greatest concern of all. Spiritual insanity happens right before the loss of my core. I had the feeling I was losing myself. I could not lose myself after I had lost my God. I could not let go no matter what. I needed to hold on to the memory of who God made me to be. I knew if I let go of my spiritual core, I would be completely unpredictable in all aspects. I would lose my soul and I would lose control over my choices. I knew losing my soul was like going on autopilot. My human carnal need dictate my actions and choices the second I lose my core. I would be a spirit watching myself be free in all the wrong ways. I never desired to meet such a level of spiritual freedom. I arrived at the state of spiritual insanity. Earthly spiritual freedom brings chaos and pleasure, but it costs us our core and spirit. When we lose our core and set our spirits free, it is like a pilot vanishing from a plane, causing the plane to fly on its own. The core of who we are is our spiritual design and instructions. The gift of God defines the core of who we are before He sent us to this godless planet. The core is the instructions we can refer to when we feel lost and uncertain. We may not want to listen to our core when it comes to suffering and pain. We usually want to feel better when it comes to feeling anything that is negative. We usually make horrible choices when we do not stop to listen to our core. We usually make choices that we believe will serve us best. We must consider the consequences of every choice we make. When we stop to consider the consequences of our choices, we start paying attention to our core. God gave us a core as a tool to diagnose all situations with precision. When we lack the time to stop and listen to our core, we make choices without awareness. We make irrational choices when we focus on physical desires. When we think about what we need to bring us self-peace, we will do almost anything to achieve it. When we want to achieve self-peace, we may only consider our self-peace. When we only have a goal of achieving self-peace, that is where we fall into a place that may be selfish. When we fall into a place of selfishness, we are looking for instant results. When we are looking for instant results, we risk losing our core. The core is a place inside us used for reasoning and wise calculations. If we lose our core, we also lose our ability to reason and make wise choices. I have lost my core for a short period before and slipped into spiritual insanity. I sense the location of my core because we never truly lose it. We simply stray too far from it. As we drift away from our core, we feel more spiritually disconnected. When we feel spiritually lost, it becomes hard to remember who we truly are. When I strayed too far from my core, I did experience what it felt like to be on autopilot. I understood what it was to be doing things to be happy without any thought of consequences. I only cared about being happy. I felt I deserved to be happy. I traveled so far from my core, I justified every action I took to be happy, even when it was negative. My core, my conscience, was not a concern the further I got away from my core. I slipped further and further into darkness. In darkness, I was hurting myself and others. I had never been so justified in my happiness. I had slipped into spiritual insanity, like sliding down a slide. I fell into the darkness I had created. I fell into a place that was void of happiness and pleasure. I had lost my direction and focus. I could no longer feel or see the direction I was going in this life. I was certain of my choices and feelings until I became too selfish. My fall into spiritual insanity has happened many times in my life. Spiritual insanity creates chaos and doubt, and I have felt lost in it. I made it out of spiritual insanity before until the path back to my core grew longer. Spiritual suppression takes us away from our true selves. Spiritual insanity happens when we lose touch with our core. Without our connection to God, spiritual insanity feels like being on a cliff's edge. My fall off the cliff made me grasp for the cliff edge. My grasp was beyond the cliff edge. I still reached out for it. I did not want to lose my connection to my core forever. The path to becoming permanently lost from our core involves embracing selfishness. We can embrace selfishness in an attempt to ignore our past selfishness. Using selfishness to ignore our own selfishness puts us in a maze of spiritual confusion. When we are in a maze of spiritual confusion, we create a maze of unfamiliarity. When we get lost in an unfamiliar maze, we seem unable to find our way back to our core. When we are stuck in spiritual insanity is when we need to stop and not press forward. Whenever we get lost, we must stop and think about where we are. When we stop and meditate on our core is when we may be able to pick up on the core's signal. The core sends out a homing signal no matter our spiritual location. When the core sends out a signal, we must stop and listen to which direction we need to go to find it again. Living in this busy world and stopping does not seem very practical at times. We may stop here and there to listen to our core, but feel we must keep on the move. We may feel we do not have time to stop and listen to our core because of life's demands on our physical reality. When we do not stop and we keep going, we get further away from our core. When we get far enough away from our core, we suffer spiritual insanity. When we suffer spiritual insanity, we have a hard time focusing on our busy reality. If we try to focus on our busy reality too much, we get further from our core. The further we get from our core, the greater the spiritual insanity. When we have spiritual insanity, we lose focus. When we lose focus, we can find it hard to stay focused on reality. Spiritual insanity feels like a deep sense of abandonment and confusion. What we recognize as a familiar and stable reality turns into a strange reality we have never seen. The feeling of being so disconnected makes us feel we are at the brink of total spiritual blackout. A spiritual blackout is when we go to sleep and demonic forces take over. Moving further away from our core can allow us to be possessed. We invite chaos and insanity when we try to be too strong and too happy. Selfishness can make us lose control. Then we can lose ourselves and become possessed. When someone becomes possessed is when the spirit sleeps. Only God has the power to wake us up out of possession. Some call that an exorcism. There may be many ways to lose our cores, and selfishness is one of them. We could lose our cores because of feeling alone and abused. We can lose sight of our core through trauma and pain. We can lose sight of our core when things in life happen that we cannot control. The core of who we are is the place that helps us feel grounded. Losing our core does not mean we have lost the core. It means we have misplaced it. If you can stop and see the maze in your mind, then you can stop and hear your core calling out to you. The core is calling out with directions to see the maze and find our way back to it. I have been traveling back to my core for a long time now. The problem with losing your core is that you can stop and feel it, but you cannot see it. I knew my core was there. I could feel it. I knew that I had not lost my core. I had disconnected myself from God. This world pulls us away from our core. When we focus on the world, we drift further from ourselves. No matter how close we get to our core, this world seems to be pulling us away from it. I have discovered my core many times, and something has pulled me back away from it. The reason I am still searching for my core is that this world keeps pulling me away from it. I must keep rediscovering who I am. I step slower now and think more. I take the time to realize that I never know where I am going without stopping and listening to my core. My core is my direction in all my choices because my core is from God. I have tried to find a balance between my core and this reality. I have done my best to cut out things that drag me too far away from my core. When I feel spiritual anxiety, I notice my choices. I know the feeling of falling into chaos and disorder. I've built an internal alarm over the years. It signals when I'm about to go off the edge. Then I know I need to pause and think. I no longer push ahead with self-importance. I do not try to be strong and happy. I no longer try to be wise and intelligent on my own. I know my God created core has all the information I need to listen to if I can stop. There is a human mental and emotional insanity, but spiritual insanity is the loss of God and our core. I have been so lost in spiritual darkness, I lost my ability to focus. I have lost my direction in this reality. I lost spirituality as I grew more distant from my core. I do not like feeling stuck and lost. I love getting lost, but I do not want to live there. Order and consideration make up my core. A desire to seek wisdom forms my core. My core is a design of my love for God. I do not like the thought of losing my love for God. The terror of spiritual disconnection. Being lost fills you with both the anxiety and panic that make you feel alive and dead at the same time. We can have a feeling of coming and going all at the same time while feeling the loss of our core. When I lose my core, I can be even more selfish, desperate to get back to it. When I'm desperate to return to my core but don't stop to listen, I make more mistakes. The more mistakes I make getting back to my core, the further away I am taken from my core. I cannot cheat how I get back to my core. I cannot force my way back to my core. I can only stop and listen for the sound of my core and the directions it is giving me. Our spiritually unstable actions can lead to spiritual blackouts. The worst part of spiritual blackouts is that we stop making bad choices. Instead, demonic forces start making those choices for us. How is our distance from our core affected by demonic forces? I would say demonic forces affect our distance from our core by dragging us into strange lands. Demonic forces are the wall of fire between us and our core. When we lose to dark forces is when we lose our soul. When we lose our soul, we lose our body and spirit. I would hope to never stay lost, and I do not desire anything in this world so much that I wish to lose my soul. Why would God allow a soul to become lost? Free will is the only answer to someone becoming lost from God. We can choose to find our core or get lost from it. No one is forcing us to lose God. God does not push us away. We push ourselves away from Him. When our will oversees our lives, we push away from our core. When we push away from our core, we only care about our will. Surrendering our selfish wills for God's will does not make sense to the carnal mind. Why would we want to surrender our happiness for God's happiness? How can we make God's happiness our happiness so we can still be happy? We have limited understanding and comprehension. The further we get from our core, we need to understand our limits and boundaries by listening to our core. We can feel frustrated by what and who we are. We can change what we can add to ourselves and what we allow others to take from us. We may think we control what we add and take away from ourselves, but that is not true. We receive so many options about what we can do, and we think we are in control. Everything that we can add to ourselves and take from ourselves is a pre-design of our creation. What we add and take away, God allows, and we call it a choice. We must realize we are the design, not the architect. We have free will, but free will is 1 trillion choices, not 1,000,000,001. We are free to choose what we have. Free will is not a choice of choosing what is not included. Choosing from 1 trillion colored marbles shows our idea of free will. We pick what we want. The only being that has true free will is God, because God makes the options available. We have the right to choose to stop or go faster. We have the right to live how we want. We do not have the right to choose any spiritual consequence that comes from our choices. Spiritual insanity is a choice we make when we want all trillion marbles and not what we can carry. We can take on the burden of spiritual overload. When we spiritually overload ourselves, we desire everything. We discover true earthly happiness by gaining the world while sacrificing our souls. It is amazing how far we can go in good and evil directions. It is also amazing how we can make the same choices for good and evil and still end up in spiritual darkness. We can do good things for the right reasons for good and evil. We can help someone and be good. We can slaughter every man, woman, and child and commit evil for the greater good. We can justify our actions and lose sight of what is good and evil. When we lose sight of good and evil is when we start justifying our actions for what we feel is right at any cost. What is good? Good is the creation of building things up and what is positive. Evil is the destruction and removal of what is not desirable. How do we live according to this definition? I live each day understanding the true definition of good and evil. We often think evil is when someone harms someone, but evil can be any malicious action or thought. Being good means improving things. It's when we act with selflessness, not expecting anything in return. We live in a world where we often make up the rules for what makes us feel good. We like to feel good about what we believe is good and evil. We can condemn someone for evil while we ourselves are doing something evil in a different way. There are many degrees of good and evil. The degrees of good and evil depend on cause and effect. Our actions affect reality, determining the cause and effect of good and evil. Regardless of the degree of good and evil, good is always good, and evil will always be evil. We can justify doing evil as good, but we are still being evil for a good result. We should not run away from the truth of good and evil. We should not deny what good and evil mean in their purest forms. We can mix good and evil together. We can mix oil and water together. Oil and water will never mix, even though they can appear to be combined for a short time. When we see the true meaning of good and evil, we can know if we're moving toward or away from spiritual madness. We will always have to deal with the imbalance of how close we are to our core because the world pulls us away from it. While there is good and evil in this world, we will always be at risk of spiritual insanity and spiritual loss. I have heard that people call spiritual war the good fight. I call it a miserable fight against ignorance. I do not believe a fight is ever good, but the results are in the victor's good favor. The victor and the loser are both fighting for their greater good. I see very little meaning in taking a test I was most likely to fail. The test is earth. The test proves our strength to trust God. What is true spiritual strength? In the Old Testament, there's a scripture that shows how Moses held up his staff. When he did this, Israel started to win. When Moses let down the staff, the army of Israel would begin to lose. God provided spiritual power when someone held up that staff. That staff that Moses held up was necessary for Israel to win, with the power of God behind it. The staff was so important for the victory of Israel that Aaron and Hur came to help Moses hold it up. True spiritual power comes from God. We do not produce spiritual power in us. We can only harness spiritual power when it is offered to us. We are vessels in need of water. We need the ever-running water of God. We need God's energy to give us strength. This helps us overcome dark and evil situations. Without the energy of God, we are candles without fire in the darkness. We can gain true spiritual power only when God chooses for us to possess it. I used to believe there were a ton of reasons to bless me with true power. I have come to understand how I would and could abuse spiritual power. We can run and hide from our core, but we will always possess a desire to return to it. Everyone has some capacity to realize how far they are from their core. Spiritual insanity is the true chaos in this world. This planet is spiritual insanity because it is a fallen planet of random chaos. I do fight every day for spiritual sanity. I am not sure how effective my fight against my personal evil keeps me sane. When doubt creeps in, I pray more. I may not have a direct connection to God, but it still seems that my prayers get answered. I do not question how blessed I am. I have already lost enough in my existence, in this existence. I have experienced spiritual insanity and knew my next step was the loss of control. I do not require control in this world, but I do need to manage myself. I need control over myself with trust that I will not lash out or act out in a negative way. I need to know I can depend on myself to keep me safe from harm. At one point, I stopped worrying about what others might do to me. Instead, I focused on what damage I could do to myself. Looking inside, I sense my core drifting away. This makes me want to know God more and return to my true self. I've devoted my life to spiritual sanity after going through a time of spiritual insanity. My desire does not create results alone. My results reflect my consistency in consistently moving toward the right direction. I will go toward my core no matter how many times I am pulled backward away from it. Diving into spiritual darkness brings anxiety and panic attacks. I would never cease to have ups and downs if I were to choose spiritual insanity. I know now I cannot serve two masters, but I feel trapped in an ongoing struggle between them. I serve each master at different times, which creates a conundrum in my soul. Spiritual insanity is the pull of this world and the pull of God on each arm. What feels good and tastes good can be both good and evil. Choosing between good and evil can be confusing. Evil often brings me the most pleasure, tempting me toward spiritual madness. I can think I'm doing so well for myself and end up in the middle of my own spiritual ocean. I can float around my dark spiritual ocean with no one to help me. The only way I have ever heard of being free from spiritual insanity is in Revelations. Revelations state that the only way to be free from spiritual insanity is to be free from evil, all evil. While we are here on earth, we will have to deal with the flimsy conditions that come with being alive. What we can control is not much, but it is better to have control over something rather than nothing. I try not to spoil myself with evil and complain because I am still externally blessed. I persist in searching for the facts that connect my spiritual life and earthly life. I focus on my core in hopes of reconnecting with God one day. We can choose and feel in control of this mixed up world, but in truth, only God controls everything. We usually find our limits and boundaries of how much we control the hard way. I have learned the hard way my whole life. I have found that the way to prevent learning the hard way is to stop, slow down, and consider my options. If I can consider my options, then I am less likely to end up in a situation that brings me devastation. I had thought I could plow through spiritual darkness and get right back to my core and God. My version of plowing through spiritual darkness was like a snowplow in Antarctica. My mistakes as a self-willed powerhouse pushed me away from God and my true self. I do not like spiritual darkness and continue to try to make choices that bring me closer to my core and God. I am a flawed human being who has a broken, selfish will. I can recognize that I am broken and require ongoing repairs. The times I must worry the most are when I believe I am fixed. When I think I am fixed is when I believe I am making all the right choices. When I think I am making all the right choices is when I think I can do nothing wrong. When I think I can do no wrong is when I am leaning over the cliff, preparing to jump off the cliff. The motivation for jumping off the cliff is the ignorance of my narcissistic ego.